The rough-hewn timber of the barn wall bit into her cheek, the scent of stale straw and fear thick in the air. Alara's wrists screamed against the ropes, tied high above her head, her feet barely touching the dirt floor. Beside her, her younger sister, Wren, whimpered, a small, fragile sound that tore at Alara's already raw throat. Footsteps crunched closer, heavy and deliberate, followed by the swing of a leather strap. Pain erupted across Alara's back, a white-hot line that stole her breath, followed by another and another. Her stepfather's curses were low and guttural, fueled by cheap whiskey and a simmering rage that had become the constant weather pattern of their lives. This was not punishment. It was simply the cruel, rhythmic assertion of power, a reminder that they owned nothing, not even their own skin. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, trying to retreat into a place where the pain couldn't follow. But there was no such place left. The world had shrunk to the confines of this dark, airless space, echoing with the sickening thud of leather and Wren's terrified sobs. She couldn't protect her sister. She couldn't protect herself. Despair, cold and absolute, settled deep in her bones. The blows continued, relentless and brutal. She tasted blood, bit back a cry that would only egg him on. Just survive. Just endure. It was the only prayer she had left. Then, a sound cut through the barn's suffocating atmosphere, the distinct jingle of spurs, the rhythmic creak of saddle leather. Unfamiliar. Close. Couldn't be. No one ever came this way. They were miles from the nearest settlement, their small, isolated cabin a place people avoided, whispers following her stepfather's name. The beating stopped. Alara heard a pause, then a harsh, questioning shout from her stepfather near the barn door. A deeper, steady voice answered, low and calm. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was level, unhurried, a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the man who held their lives in his hands. There was a tense silence, broken only by the restless shuffling of hooves outside. Her stepfather growled something unintelligible, and then, unbelievably, the barn door creaked open further. A sliver of bright, late afternoon sun pierced the gloom, and silhouetted against it stood a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, a wide-brimmed hat obscuring his face. A cowboy. Alara watched through pain-blurred eyes as her stepfather stumbled forward, blustering, trying to wave the stranger away. The cowboy didn't move, just stood there, radiating a quiet, immovable presence. He said something else, and this time, as her stepfather stepped slightly aside, she saw his face. Stern, weathered, eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He looked past her stepfather, into the barn's depths, and his gaze landed on her, then on Wren. It was a look devoid of judgment, but filled with a sudden, sharp understanding that made Alara's breath catch. He saw. He didn't turn away. Her stepfather started shouting again, spittle flying, waving his arms. The cowboy remained still for another beat. Then, in a movement too fast for Alara to follow, something glinted. A single, sharp sound echoed. A slap? A punch? Her stepfather grunted, stumbled back, clutching his jaw. Before he could recover, the cowboy stepped fully into the barn, his movements economical and precise. He didn't look at her stepfather, who was now cursing furiously but keeping his distance. The cowboy walked directly to Alara, his spurs ringing softly. He reached up, the knife in his hand a blur as it sliced through the ropes binding her wrists. They fell away, leaving her hands tingling, raw, and blessedly free. He did the same for Wren, his expression unreadable but gentle as he untied the smaller hands. Wren clung instantly to Alara, burying her face in her sister's side, trembling. The cowboy knelt, examining the ropes around their ankles. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice low, a rumble that felt unexpectedly safe. Alara nodded mutely, testing her weight. Her legs were shaky, but they held. He cut the ankle ropes. "Outside," he said, glancing once towards the barn door where her stepfather hovered, nursing his jaw, fury boiling in his eyes but something else there too, caution, perhaps fear. Now, he didn't wait for them. instead turning to face the doorway, placing himself between them and the threat. Alara gathered Ren, her body aching with every movement, and together, they stumbled out of the barn and into the blinding sunlight. The world felt impossibly large, terrifyingly open. Yet for the first time in a long time, a tiny flicker of something other than despair began to stir within her. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the vast sky in hues of orange and purple, a cruel beauty against the stark reality of their situation. They rode double on the cowboy's horse, Ren cradled between Alara and the stranger, Alara's back throbbing with every gentle sway of the animal. He rode in silence, his posture straight, eyes scanning the horizon. His name, he had finally said, was Elias. Just Elias. No questions about where they came from, no judgment about their state. He had simply helped them onto his horse, retrieved a blanket from his saddlebag to wrap around Ren, and set off at a steady pace, leaving the barn and the man within it behind without a backward glance. Alara risked a look back once, seeing the small cabin receding, the barn a dark rectangle against the scrubby landscape. She felt a pang of loss, illogical though it was. It had been their home, however terrible. But mostly, she felt a profound, dizzying sense of freedom, fragile and terrifying in its newness. The silence stretched, heavy but not oppressive. Alara's initial shock was giving way to exhaustion and a dull, persistent ache across her shoulders and back. She leaned back slightly against Elias's solid form, drawing comfort from his quiet presence. He smelled of horse, leather, and the clean, sharp scent of the wind. Ren had fallen asleep against her, her breathing soft and even. Alara watched the landscape roll by dry, dusty plains broken by occasional rocky outcrops and sparse, hardy vegetation. It was a harsh land, unforgiving. Survival here demanded strength and knowledge. She knew nothing of this world beyond the small patch of land they had inhabited. Fear tried to creep back in. What would happen to them now? Where were they going? But the fear was tempered by the simple fact that they were not there, not in the barn, not with him. That single, undeniable reality was a lifeline. Elias seemed to sense her tension, or perhaps just the long miles. He finally spoke, his voice quiet, directed towards the setting sun. Got a line cabin a few hours ahead. Ain't much, but it's shelter. He offered no further explanation. No details of ownership or purpose. A line cabin, a temporary shelter used by cowboys or ranchers on long patrols. It meant he was likely working, passing through, not a permanent savior. The reality was sobering, yet the offer of shelter, however temporary, felt like a reprieve. "Thank you," Alara murmured, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what he had done. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. That was all. His communication was sparse, his actions his language. He had seen two children in distress and acted. There seemed to be no complicated motive, no expectation of gratitude. Just a simple, stark morality in a world that often seemed devoid of it. As darkness began to settle, the air grew cooler. Alara shivered slightly, pulling Ren closer. Elias shifted, pulling a worn blanket from his saddlebag without stopping, and passed it back to her. "Wrap her good," he said. His hand brushed hers as she took the blanket, his touch calloused and brief, yet again, surprisingly gentle. Small gestures, but in this vast, empty space, under this indifferent sky, they felt monumental. She wrapped Ren snugly, then draped the rest around her own shoulders. The warmth was immediate, a physical comfort that mirrored the quiet, growing sense of safety she felt in Elias's presence. It wasn't trust, not yet. Trust was a fragile thing, easily broken, and she had seen too much of that. It was something more basic, more instinctual, a sense that he was solid ground in a world that had been constantly shifting beneath her feet. He kept them moving steadily through the fading light, a silent, capable figure guiding them towards an unknown, but hopefully safer, horizon. The stars began to prick the darkening sky, distant and cold, but below them, the horses' hooves kept rhythm, a steady, reassuring sound. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself the smallest measure of relief. They were alive. They were away. For now, that was enough. The line cabin was indeed not much. A single small room built of rough logs, smelling faintly of pine and dust. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. There was a narrow cot, a small table, and a few hooks for gear. Elias dismounted smoothly, lifting Wren carefully from the horse and carrying her inside. He laid her gently on the cot. Alara slid down, her legs stiff and sore, wincing as her back protested. Elias watched her for a moment, his gaze assessing but not intrusive. He untied a bedroll from his saddle. "Fire," he said, indicating the hearth. "Keep the chill off." He began to gather kindling and larger pieces of wood he had apparently collected earlier or knew were stored nearby. Alara, despite her pain, moved to help, her movements slow. She struck a match from a small tin Elias offered, and the fire caught quickly, casting flickering light and warmth into the small space. The dancing flames seemed to push back the darkness that felt not just outside the cabin, but inside her as well. Elias unpacked minimal supplies from his saddlebags: dried meat, hardtack, a tin of beans he set near the fire to warm, and a small, battered medical kit. He knelt beside Alara. "Need to look at that back," he stated, not a question. Alara hesitated, a wave of shame washing over her. She hadn't let anyone see the marks before. Not since. He waited patiently, his expression neutral. Taking a deep breath, she slowly turned, pulling her torn dress away from her skin. A sharp intake of breath from Elias, quickly suppressed. She couldn't see his face, but she felt the shift in the air, a stillness. His touch was feather-light, impossibly gentle, as he cleaned the raw wounds with a damp cloth and applied a salve that smelled faintly of herbs. "Hurts?" he asked finally, his voice low. Alara just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Meds in here," he said, tapping the kit. "Help with the pain. And fever." Maybe he didn't hover, didn't pity. He simply provided practical aid. This quiet competence, this lack of fuss, was a balm in itself. They ate the meager meal mostly in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and Wren's soft breathing from the cot. Alara watched Elias from across the small table. He ate slowly, deliberately, his eyes scanning the room, the doorway. Alert always. He seemed perfectly at ease in this Spartan environment, a man shaped by the harshness of the land, yet capable of unexpected tenderness. She noticed the fine lines etched around his eyes, the slight scar near his left eyebrow. He carried his own stories, she realized, burdens she could only guess at. He was an enigma, this man who had appeared out of the twilight to sever the ropes that bound them. As the night wore on, Wren woke, disoriented and fearful. Alara held her close, murmuring reassurances. Elias didn't interrupt, didn't intrude. He simply stoked the fire, ensuring the cabin remained warm. Wren finally drifted back to sleep in Alara's arms. Elias unrolled his bedroll near the door, a silent sentinel. He won't find us here?" Alara whispered, the fear she had been holding back finally escaping. Elias paused, looking at the dark doorway. "Possible," he admitted, his honesty stark. "But this country's big, and I covered our tracks best I could." A moment's silence. "He's got reason to look. Reason to be careful, too." He didn't elaborate on what that reason was, but Alara understood. He had hurt her stepfather, embarrassed him, and someone like that wouldn't take kindly to being thwarted. The threat was still real, still out there in the darkness. But looking at Elias, silhouetted against the firelight, his posture calm and ready, Alara felt a new kind of strength bloom in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. She had this quiet, capable stranger by her side. And in the face of the vast, indifferent night and the dangers it might hold, that felt like everything. She lay down carefully beside Wren on the cot, the rough wool of the blanket a welcome weight. Sleep came slowly, punctuated by the fire's snap and Elias's steady breathing by the door. Days blurred into a quiet, careful rhythm in the line cabin. Elias was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He hunted small game, ensuring they had food. He scouted the surrounding area, his movements swift and silent, a constant vigil kept against any potential threat. He showed Alara how to clean and bandage her wounds herself, his instruction clear and concise. As her physical pain began to subside, replaced by a dull, lingering ache, her strength slowly returned. She helped with chores, keeping the fire going, fetching water from the nearby stream. She watched Elias learning how he moved through the brush, how he read the signs of the land, the almost imperceptible ways he communicated danger or safety through a look, a posture. Ren, initially withdrawn and timid, slowly began to unfurl under Elias's quiet care. He never forced interaction, but would leave small, carved wooden animals he whittled in the evenings near the cot, or point out a bird's nest outside. Simple things that built a bridge of trust, one careful stone at a time. Alara saw the difference in Ren, the return of a flicker of childhood light in her eyes, and her gratitude towards Elias deepened into something more profound than simple thanks. It was respect, admiration, and a burgeoning sense of connection. One evening, as Alara cleaned the small tin plates by the fire, Elias sat mending a tear in his saddle. The silence was comfortable now, filled with the quiet sounds of their tasks and the fire. "You ride well," she said finally, the words feeling inadequate. He looked up, his eyes holding hers for a moment. "Long practice," he replied simply, then returned to his work. She wanted to ask about his life, about why he was out here alone, what had brought him to that barn at that precise moment. But she knew instinctively not to push. His past was his own, revealed only through his present actions. A week passed. The wounds on Alara's back were healing, leaving raised, pink scars that were a permanent, unwelcome reminder of what had been. But they were scars of survival, too. She stood taller now, her gaze steadier. The constant knot of fear in her stomach had loosened, replaced by a quiet determination. She wasn't the same girl who had been tied in that barn. The helplessness had been burned out of her, replaced by a fierce resolve to protect Ren and build a life, somehow, somewhere. One morning, Elias returned from scouting with a grin set to his jaw. "Rider passed maybe half a day's ride south," he said, his voice low. Heading this way, he didn't need to say who it was. Alara's stomach clenched, but the fear was different this time, sharp and immediate. Not the crushing despair of before. It was a call to action. "We move?" she asked, her voice steady. Elias nodded. "Can't stay here now." Too exposed, he looked at them, his gaze lingering on Ren, then on Alara's face, seeing the change in her. "It'll be harder traveling now. Longer miles. Less cover." Alara straightened her shoulders. "We're ready," she said. It was true. The days in the cabin had not just healed their bodies, but fortified their spirits. They had found a fragile sanctuary, learned resilience from the man who provided it. Packing was quick. They had little to take. As they prepared to leave the small cabin that had been their haven, Alara felt a sense of purpose. They weren't just running anymore. They were moving forward, actively choosing their path. Elias led his horse out, the reins in his hand. Ren was already waiting by the door, her small hand clutching a wooden bird he had carved. Alara looked back at the cabin one last time, a place of healing, of quiet strength. Then she stepped out into the bright, open day, ready to face whatever came next, not with fear, but with the quiet courage that had taken root within her. Elias mounted his horse, and this time Alara didn't need help. She swung herself up behind him, settling Ren in front of her. They rode out, leaving the cabin behind, a silent, resolute trio moving into the vast, unpredictable landscape. The world remained harsh, the future uncertain, but they faced it together, bound not by blood or circumstance, but by survival, trust, and the quiet strength forged in the crucible of shared hardship. The sun was high in the sky, and the road ahead stretched long and dusty, but for the first time, Alara felt a sense of possibility, a glimmer of hope as resilient and enduring as the land itself.